You mentioned when we take a certain guy up to a certain body weight, and we kind of ruin their ability to put on muscle. Now, we kind of look at the science crowd and they talk about P ratios, right? And some people in the science crowd would argue that no matter how fat that somebody may get, they still have the same ability to put on muscle. Now, this is something that I don't necessarily 100% see play out in the real world. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain on kind of what you've seen as well, because it seems like you agree from what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's no absolutes like you said, but just what I found is that a lot of people, if you take somebody, and I think a lot of us, a lot of the audience that you have here on your show, and a lot of the audience that I have, because it's the vast majority of people that make up gym goers, athletes, bodybuilders, competitive or otherwise, are going to be people with more average genetics. And I've found that the more fat you put on, the more fat you put on. And even if you were to continue growing muscle with that, you're going to have to work that much harder to get the fat off. And, earlier on, I can say that a decade ago, I would force people a lot harder. I would push them a lot harder than I do. I'd put a lot more body fat on in order to get those gains. But if they don't have the ability to train hard enough to make use of that, which a lot of people don't, no matter how much gear they're taking or how much food I have them eating, they're generally not going to maximize that. And even if they are super hard trainers and they've got everything dialed in, they're getting the right dose of intensity and volume, it still is counterproductive to put on too much fat. I found that if I can keep somebody leaner, I can keep them growing longer. And let's just say that, for instance, I'm picturing one guy that I'm working with now. He hired me around the beginning of the year, I believe it was, if not a little bit before that. And his goal is to compete in November. So anyway, he's still pretty lean right now. Like, he's in incredible shape. Like, he still has cuts in his legs, still has his abs, like no lower back fat at all. Nothing's like hanging over his trunks from behind. I would put him at like a super conservative 12 weeks out, meaning I could get him in shape in about 7 weeks if I absolutely had to. Like, if we had to crunch down, we could do it. But conservatively, like 12 weeks, we could get him there. Now, if I were to push him up to super high body fat levels, then we would have to grind that much harder and cut things back that much further, that much sooner, versus right now where he stands. We're recording this. I don't know when it'll come out, but we're recording this April 20th. And I mean, I see no reason that he can't still keep food high, that he can't continue to grow. We have him up at a decently high body weight, and we're still gaining scale weight each week. He's still getting stronger each week. And I don't see any reason that we can't continue to push up, versus if body fat was high, I'd have to start thinking, oh, well, when are we going to switch gears? When are we going to start to pull things back? And honestly, I'm a believer of actually being able to grow into the show too. And the leaner we keep somebody, the longer we can keep the food high, the more food you have going in while you're training hard, the more you're going to be able to grow muscle. So I think that ultimately there's a middle ground there of being able to maintain some level of condition, and we can see and keep performance high, and do that for like basically into the contest. And I could show you pictures of people that I've worked with, even natural guys. One guy in particular, I use this guy as an example. He showed me, after this is like 7-8 weeks after his contest prep. Good friend of mine, Vache, natural competitor, men's physique, small dude, and he had to diet hard. Always, every time we dieted, dude would have to go to keto, and he'd be doing a lot of cardio in order to get peeled. He showed me this picture. He said, "Hey Scott, the left picture is before the show, and the right picture was about 7 weeks after the contest." Now, keep in mind, he didn't do any kind of reverse. He basically just started eating what he wanted and lost his condition after the contest. Yet he's still in like decent shape 7 weeks after but there's no question he gained muscle. If you want, I'll send you that before and after. You could throw it up
For
on the
sure.
screen. There's no question that he made some substantial progress during this contest prep. And that's somebody who even had to diet like really hard, all the way down to keto, tons of cardio, and he's natural. So it's not like, well, he was on PEDs, so that helped him grow in a deficit. There's no question in my mind that you don't need to just get somebody completely fat to get them growing muscle, even optimally. So I'd rather keep somebody growing long term, maybe all the way into the show, versus have like a big blast off season, put on a ton of fat, and then have to rip it down.
Absolutely, and that was honestly the next question I was about to ask was, kind of some people have some of that more long-term sort of approach, like John Jewett, of saying, hey, the longer that we can kind of keep somebody in this anabolic state, the more that we're going to have people put on muscle, versus some people, maybe like Dante in the past, where he may have prescribed more to that blast and cruise sort of 6 weeks on, 4 weeks or three weeks off type of approach in the past, where it's, put on as much muscle train as hard as possible within this, very short given sort of burst, and then kind of take time off in the back end to recover. Either way, there's going to be some time spent on the back end to recover on that. And I do believe that, like you mentioned, it's going to be probably a little mentally easier, and a little bit mentally, it's going to make people feel like a bodybuilder, because at the end of the day, blowing up like Lee Priest and Jay Cutler back in the day, and kind of looking that way, at least what I've seen for a lot of my clientele, at least, is not the best mental state to be in long term, and it kind of does burn people out, being in, feeling chubby, not necessarily liking the way that they're looking in the mirror, but like, hey, I'm putting all this work, I'm putting in the same amount of work as that guy who looks shredded, year round. What's going wrong here? It's like, okay, well, maybe we have to take a step back with this certain clientele, and really understand that, hey, for them mentally, long term, it's probably going to be a better idea to keep them looking like a bodybuilder. And I think that's a hard thing to kind of relay to somebody who's never competed before, especially is that process, like you mentioned, of growing and then growing into the show, because the leaner that we can keep somebody during that off-season phase, the higher, like you said, the more potential that we have for refeeds, diet breaks, and things like that are really going to help drive some more anabolism, even while somebody is in a period of long-term caloric deficit. Now, with that, there does come the discussion of protein, because we've seen people talk about super high protein intakes, and that being very beneficial. I know that was very, very popular back in the early 2000s and 90s with coaches such as Chad Nichols, prescribing crap ton of protein. But recently, it seems like guys have really, really toned back on protein intake for sake of digestion. Now, we obviously know the answer for a majority of people is probably going to be in the middle ground, like most things in bodybuilding. However, from your opinion, have you ever seen, higher protein intake be beneficial for somebody who's really looking to put on muscle in an off season?
Yeah, I think that, once again, it's going to be individual, but I do try to push protein up where we can. And I don't go crazy with it. But, I think of one person who really got me thinking about this years ago was somebody that I would consider to be a mentor and close friend. Rest in peace. His name was Dave Kalick. Dave Kalick was a bodybuilder in the early 2000s, and he coached a lot of people out, especially West Coast. Stan McQuay, who was a fantastic bodybuilder in the early 2000s, was coached by Dave through his whole career. Stan competed as, what was it? I think he started as a 202 before they had 212. He went to 212, and I want to say he even did classic. He may have done open at one point as well. I can't remember that. But, talking to Dave, I asked him, I was like, what was the biggest difference in his diet from, Stan McQuay at his absolute most like full blowing look versus the more pared down looks? And he said it was the protein. He said I had him on like 6 ounces of protein at his, I can't remember what it was, but at one of his smaller looks. And when he was bursting at the seams in 212, he was eating 10 ounces of protein per meal. Simple as that. That was the only thing that was different. I think that this is part of the conversation where PEDs do come into play. I do believe that we can assimilate more protein. on PEDs. I also believe that the harder we train, the more we can drive nutrients into the muscle. I really, truly do believe that. And if I can step back for just a minute, I think that, so my take previously on, staying on the leaner side, being able to continue growing into the show, it's a conservative approach. It's a long-term approach. But if we can gain several pounds of muscle per year doing that, that means that you might be 20 pounds up in 3 or 4 years, so it still is an effective approach. And I also mentioned that particular idea or mindset serves a lot of your average people. You mentioned Dante pushing diets harder, and absolutely, like, he drove the food up high. That food was to support people that were training at the upward end of maximum intensity, with DC training. Not everybody is capable of doing what Dante put out for DC. In fact, I tried it years ago, and all I did was get hurt. Like, it made early on, man, it made no sense to me. And Dante would have told me at that time too, like, you stupid kid, you shouldn't even be doing this workout right now. You're not advanced enough. And then I probably would have given him the finger and said that he was, like, just not paying, that he didn't know. Yeah. He didn't know me, maybe something like that. You don't know me. But, the reality is I did figure out high intensity later, and it did make a lot more sense. So I just wanted to say that, I don't know if I would consider your average DC trainer as being like the average person. I think that they have a leg up, because back to what I was initially saying when we first started this conversation, I think that the harder you can train, the better you can make use of your nutrition, and the better progress that you can make. So if you do have somebody who is like firing on all cylinders with a perfect DC plan, and they're breaking records, and beating the logbook each week, then they would probably be the person that would stand to make the best progress out of really pushing the food up high, So I'm all for that as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there too as a side note. But yeah, back to the protein thing. I mean, I think that, once again, everybody's unique, and I would start somebody out with, maybe